right, now we're going to do some German short rows. So short rows are a way to get extra fabric so that your piece will curve. This can be seen in things like a butterfly shawl or other popular designs out there where there's like these lumps of color. I'm going to do this all in one color, and you might do something like this to get more shaping for, say, your upper back or something in a sweater or any place you would just want your fabric to curve a little bit and have just like a few extra rows in the middle, basically, is what this is going to do. So German short rows, I use, this is not required by any means, but I find it actually seems a little fiddly, but for me it goes faster because I don't end up going backwards and undoing things because I missed my double stitch. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but I use these locking stitch markers. So I will show you how I do it. Now, let's say your pattern says, and usually I see it in a garter stitch. So garter stitch is basically you just knit every row, so you've got these ridges in your fabric. So let's say your pattern says to knit 12 stitches, so I'm going to do that quick. All right, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, and then it will say, so say something like knit 12 stitches and then turn your work. So you're just really going to turn it over in the middle of your knitting. This is something that beginners do kind of by accident, and then they'll start knitting the other way, but not what we're doing here. We are going to, so we've turned our work. Row 2 might say something like make a double stitch for the German short rows. So to make a double stitch, we're going to take the left hand, the first stitch on the left hand needle, and just slide it over to the right. And then we're going to take this working yarn and we're going to just pull it over here. So see how that one stitch, now it has both its legs are up on the right hand needle? That's what a double stitch is. It's just pulling this over the top. You don't have to pull it super tight. You don't have to like squeeze the life out of it, but that's what it means to make a double stitch. You're just gonna pull this. It's still one stitch, but it's called a double stitch. Now here's what I do. I take my locking stitch marker and I'm going to stick it through both legs of that double stitch. It's going to remind me that that is one stitch, but it's also going to show me where it is, because later on I'm going to need to know that that's one stitch and treat it as such. But for now, just leave it there, ignore it. There's my double stitch. Now let's say the pattern now says, okay, so it said make the double stitch, and then it'll say like knit 4, 2, 3, 4, and then it'll say turn the work, and then the next row will say make a double stitch. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to slide it over and we're just going to pull that up and over. So there's a double stitch. I'm going to mark it so I don't forget it's there. You don't have to do this if you don't lose them. It's definitely slower doing it this way, but if you're like me and you don't pay a lot of attention when you're knitting, you just want to knit until something reminds you to do something different. And sometimes it can be a little tricky to see if you're not really good at reading your knitting. So I like to mark all my double stitches with locking stitch markers. Keep a ton of them around. I buy so many. They're everywhere in my house. I try to be able to find them when I need them. All right, so now we've got this double stitch. Your next row will say something like knit to the double stitch. So now I have to know where that double stitch is, because it's not going to tell me how many stitches. So it's going to say knit until you get to the double stitch. All right, there's my double stitch. Then it's going to say resolve the double stitch, or it might say knit to the end, resolving all the double stitches. But in this case, it said knit to the double stitch, resolve the double stitch. So that means we're going to knit this double stitch as if it were one stitch. So I'm leaving my marker on here for right now, but I'm going to go ahead and basically get under there as if it was one stitch. So I'm coming from the left to the right, treating this whole lump as one stitch. So I'm going underneath there, just like I would normally knit a stitch. Locking stitch marker is just hanging out for right now. I'll move it in a minute. And then it'll say, so it said knit to the double stitch, resolve the double stitch. So that's what I just did. I resolved the double stitch. So now it's back to being a regular stitch. And then it'll say knit 2 maybe. All right, so I'm knitting 2. And then it'll say turn your work. Now, at the end of that row, I am going to remove this locking stitch marker because I don't want it to confuse me. But it was on the row beneath. So we've turned our work. It's going to say make a double stitch. So I'm going to go in, and maybe this row just says repeat that last row. So remember the last row said make your double stitch. So we pull it over to the back. I'm going to mark it because I like marking it. And then it's going to say knit to the double stitch. Knitting, knitting, knitting till I get to a double stitch. Got to a double stitch here. So resolve the double stitch, going into this whole lump of stuff as if it was one stitch and knitting it. So resolve to my double stitch and then knit 2 because it said to do the same thing. And then turn your work. And I'm going to get rid of this guy. It's the one I just resolved. All right, and then it says repeat that row again. So we're going to make the double stitch. Just pull it back. There's my double stitch. I'm going to mark it. Knit to the double stitch. All right, there's my double stitch. Resolving it. And then knitting 2 more. That guy's trying to get in my way. I could remove him now if he's in the way, but there we go. 1, 2, and then turn your work. And then I'm going to take this piece, this locking stitch marker out. All right, so what's been happening here is you've noticed we've been knitting back and forth, but we haven't been knitting these edge stitches at all, right? So now we've got these extra rows right here in the middle. You see how it's getting kind of curved, and we're getting this extra bit of fabric in the center that wasn't there before. All right, so let's say the next row says make a double stitch. I'm going to make that double stitch. I'm going to mark it. Even though the pattern doesn't tell me to, I'm still going to do it because it's going to want me to find it later, and sometimes they're tricky to find. Then let's say it's going to say knit to 2 stitches before the double stitch. Okay, so I will do that. All right, 1 more to go. All right, now I have 2 stitches left before my double stitch. See, I've got that marked, so it's easy to know where's 2 stitches before, and then it says turn my work. All right, and then repeat that row. So make a double stitch. See, now I've got a couple of these. I'm going to need more stitch markers. So sometimes they're not resolved every row, especially if you're getting smaller like this one is now. So there we go. Make a double stitch. And now knit to 2 stitches before the double stitch. Oh, I went too far. You can back up 1. All right, here's my double stitch, 2 stitches before. Now the pattern says to do that same row, so turn your work. Make a double stitch. So slide that stitch over, pull it up and over. Grab another one of these locking stitch markers. Put it right through both legs of that double stitch. All right, so that's on there, double stitch. All right, this row doesn't say that because I'm just making up the pattern as I go. All right, we've made the double stitch at the beginning of this row. And now it's going to say knit to the end, resolving the double stitches as you go. So I've got these 2 double stitches here. You may have 5 or 6 depending on how big your project is, you know, what the instructions were. All right, so now I've got my double stitch. I'm going to knit it as 1. Keep going because it said to knit to the end, resolving all the double stitches as I go. And even if it doesn't say that, you're always going to resolve double stitches on the next row and treat them just as 1 stitch. So knit to the end. All right, so I could have taken those out as I went, but I remember that these 2 are the ones that I resolved, and you can see they're attached down below, whereas these ones that are still are attached right on the needle. So the ones down below I have resolved. I could leave them there till the end of the project, but I choose to remove them now at the end of the rows where I resolve them. So just the way I like to do it. Whatever feels right to you. All right, now the next row again says knit to the end and resolve the double stitch. Resolve any double stitches as you come to them. But again, even if it didn't say that, you would resolve them as you came to them. So knitting to the end. All right, 1 more to go till our first double stitch here. All right, so another double stitch to resolve, knitting right into there. Here's the other one I want to resolve. And then I finish knitting to the end. All right, and now I'm going to take a look. Actually, I'll take out these stitch markers first and then show you what we have, if my light will stay on for me. Okay, so here we go. So now we have got this fabric that is wider in the middle than it is on the ends. So a little tricky to see on the camera, but there's definitely extra rows going back and forth in the middle than there is on the edges of this fabric. And that is German short rows. A nice easy way to, and once you block this, you're never gonna see like where those edges and ends were. So there you go. And if I had used a different color, like you could have seen like just a specific like oval that we created right here. And if that's what you're going for, that's a great design element. Otherwise, it's just a nice way to add a little bit of extra fabric to places where you need it. All right, thanks, bye.